This is part two of Dave Hillman's Three Forks, Montana to the Gulf of Mexico kayak trip that he did last year in 2023. Last week we did part one, which basically covered most of the Missouri River, and it is now recorded and it is online if you guys want to look it up on YouTube. And this one will also be recorded and put up hopefully in a week or so. But go ahead, Dave, take her away.
No problem. One correction from last week. What Norm and I were talking about Pruitt Creek, and I had misread what I had seen on one of the information kiosks. I had thought they had Sergeant Ordway had buried canoes there, and Norm was the one that remembered it right. It wasn't there; it was someplace else. And I misread that. So Pruitt Creek's a great place to be. They just didn't bury any canoes there. So from that end, just want to make that correction before we get going. So this week, we'll start out with the horrible parts of it, and then we're going to go on down to the Gulf. So if you go by Dave Miller's book, we did the upper section. We went through the big reservoirs, and now we're down to the channelized section from here down to St. Louis. And you'll see why we call it channelized in a little bit. Basically, other than my River Angel, Sioux City to Omaha, I will never do again. It was just two agricultural states dumping, pardon the French, shit into the river. Not very scenic, not compared to everything else. It's 109 miles of, not all there. And this is where I got to really understand water quality. Now, I know that if you measure the water in terms of nitrates and things that are dissolved in it, that's one thing. But just visually from water quality, I've paddled all over the world. I'm from Iowa. I know what agricultural water looks like, but the water quality in here was horrible. It was just terrible. And here's a picture you can see. This is a gravel pit. I know this is permitted. It's allowed. And they're dumping some kind of runoff water off the gravel pit. But do we really need to push this into the river? I mean, I never saw this in all of Montana and both Dakotas. I never saw one pipe putting things into the river. Iowa and Nebraska, I saw it happen all the time. So I know we as a state, Iowa's got a long way to go to understand what we are doing. And at some point we'll figure this out. We have to drink this stuff and we need to fix it. This is a picture of my boat. You can see the scum line on it. That happened the day after I pulled out of Sioux City. That boat was perfectly clean white until one day of paddling 30 some odd miles south of Sioux City. It took that long to create a scum line that took a power buffer to get out. So I don't know what's going on in the water. It's not pretty. So, and that's why I said, excuse me, last week, I would filter water above. I would even filter water down below Sioux City. I just think it'll just mess up your filters horribly. So this is why they call it the channelized section. So if you look at in the yellow, that is from 18, and I've got faces over that part of it, but 18, there we go. 1879, that's what the river looked like. And it's what the Missouri was known for. It multi-braided, multi-channels, water going everywhere. The blue is 1954. And that's after the Corps of Engineers has spent many years trying to keep the Missouri within a predictable route. Unfortunately, they lose the battle more than they win. Let's see, next cell. So what their primary was, and I'm still doing some research to find out when they put these in, but it looks like at least probably the late 40s, mid 50s, they did pile driving. And you can see the piles here. They would drive them about 20 foot into the toe of the bank, about 20 feet above, and they'd wrap them with steel to keep them together. They did it in sets of threes. And the idea being that the river won't go in here now and try to cut this out and undercut it and blow through the shore. However, the river doesn't really care. It does things like this. It throws big trees at them and breaks them and snaps them. So while we have this belief that we are managing the river, we're reacting to the river. We really aren't managing it. The Corps now has gone to rock instead of wooden pilings, much more permanent, but I can tell you as going down it, I saw a lot of places. In fact, from above St. Louis, I only saw 4 barges. One commercial was unloading fertilizer. The rest of the barges were all Corps of Engineer moving rock. There was no commercial traffic. Most of the traffic on the river, from a grain standpoint, is now either done by semi-truck or by rail. And so the river has wiped out enough of the infrastructure along the river. I don't know if I included any of those pictures, but I took a lot of them where it just barge traffic on the Missouri. I don't see how it makes sense. I get it on the Missouri, on the Mississippi, on the Missouri. And like the top picture here, they're just repairing something that got blown out in either 2011 or 2019. The river will go where it wants to. So hopefully down the road, we have a meaningful conversation about what really is the purpose of what we're doing with Missouri and the Corps of Engineers actions to that. Wilson Island. So unlike the eastern side of Iowa, where we have dozens of parks, there are only 2 parks on the western edge of Iowa along the Missouri River. One is Wilson Island, and the other is starts with an M. It's down near Omaha. It's a mile off the river, so there was no way I was going to use that. But I planned on, that's my son Josh down there on the left. We had planned on doing a resupply at Wilson Island. Good place to set, showers, water. In fact, the neat thing was Josh and my buddy Doug, we got talking and one night and starting to set this up. And Doug had made the mention that, well, yeah, I'm just finishing up some sweet corn we got at the store. And I thought, I'm going to miss sweet corn season. All of it. I won't get to be part of it. So when they asked what did I want brought over, I said, I don't care if what you bring for meat, but sweet corn and potatoes and green beans and onions, and bring me all the veggies that I can't have in my boat. You know, if I did, they'd squish. And so you can see the big spread they had laid out. A bunch of people came over, and we just kind of sat around that day and ate like kings and queens and just talked about things. And it was a good resupply. My son ran me into the towns near there, and we got picked up some stuff, and he brought a bunch of stuff over. So really good place. If any of the 2023 people are coming down, if I can meet them there, I will come over to Wilson Island from Cedar Rapids and help them do a resupply. It's hard to do the meetings, but I'm only a 4-hour drive over. It's pretty simple for me to pop over. And Wilson Island is a very good spot to stop and take a break. You only have got to put your gear on your portage cart and go about a 1/16 of a mile to the campground. It's a very nice campground. So from there on down, you know, Omaha, Camp Maybe. I love the Maybes. Pam and Jody are awesome. I got to spend a day at their place, kind of relaxing. I got to see Nebraska City and all the sites and history of Nebraska City. But from here on down, it's only 620 miles to the confluence. Starting to really be happy, starting to feel like I'm going to actually make it at this point. And now I'm also getting down to what I would call the jewel part of the trip. The stuff up north where the wilderness is great, but now you get to get into the little towns and the history, which was really cool. So this is the picture that never happened. So I came up, and this was one of those pipes that was dumping something into the river. I thought these were catfish all in there swimming around, you know, eating whatever was coming in as influent. And I sat there and I pulled in quietly and I started taking pictures. And about the time I figured out these were Asian carp and not catfish is about the time they figured out I wasn't a log, but I was a canoe. And I just put my head down. There are 35 Asian carp everywhere, bouncing off me, bouncing off the boat, bouncing off my gear. I just wasn't smart enough to take it would be the coolest picture if I just snapped that picture right then and there. But Asian carp are one of the invasive species on the river. The eagles are doing a pretty good number on them, but you know, if you were in a motorboat going 20, 30 mile per hour and one of these fish jumped up and hit you, you could be pretty seriously injured. So most of the time in the boat, they just played kamikaze and would bounce off the boat. I think in the whole trip, I got hit maybe 2 or 3 times in the upper body and never anything bad. But Asian carp, that's one thing to worry about. Again, I talked about it's really hard for people to meet you out there. And the second group, that's Josh Woods on the left and Dan Prater on the right. They both met me on the river above Cooper's Landing. In fact, I was already on a campground sitting there. They came in right after work. They paddled in the dark to the first sandbar they could see and camped. And then they came down early in the morning. We met up and got to paddle down and just had a blast talking with them and sharing the river. So that was pretty special. Those guys went out of the way to share part of the journey. Again, beautiful sunrises. You're just out there just taking it all in. It's really, really cool. And then there's this. I don't know what it is, but apparently round balls and the river get along. In 3,700 miles, I didn't find one football, not one. But I saw basketballs, baseballs, softballs, soccer balls, that little, this purple geodesic thing, this plastic bowling ball. I could have filled 3 semis full of balls. And if I could have cleaned them off, I probably could have financed the trip. It is just amazing. Apparently the wind picks up balls, rolls them into the river. But the whole length of Missouri, I just kept seeing this. And I thought it was just really weird to see all that happen. Another really cool thing is Serenity Point down near Norm. That's Jefferson City, right?
Correct. Yep.
And so there's a river angel down there by the name of Joe Wilson, which I had a really good connection to. Joe passed away a few years back, but at one point I got this call from Joe Wilson. I didn't know Joe, and Joe was just down there maintaining this park. The Missouri Department of Natural Resources works on it, but Joe was retired and just took it upon himself to try to keep the park clean. He planted a flower bed with all the state flags coming down the river, and he needed one from Iowa. And I said, no problem, I'll get that sent down to you. And then we talked on the phone several times. So I'm just very bummed out that I never got to meet Joe. But this is his swing, and I got to sit there, and Joe and I had a conversation anyway. The really neat part of the story is I didn't realize this till Norm heard me talking up at the rendezvous. Joe called Norm to figure out who was in the group was an Iowa paddler so he could get a flag. So it's just these connections of, it's crazy. Norm, I don't know any more to that story.
Well, yeah, I sent him the Montana flag that there is my flag that I sent. Peggy Hellenstaff at Tobacco Gardens sending the North Dakota flag. I forget.
Patrick Wellner sent him the South Dakota.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Yep.
No,
So it's just really cool that Joe did this, and Joe's spirit lives on there. It's just a cool place to sit and look at the river.
Oh, can I interject? I was going to say at the rendezvous we had last year in South Dakota, the Missouri River Paddlers rendezvous that Dave was at. I also had a lot of Joe Wilson's ashes that his son sent after he died, and we deposited them in the river there, just upstream from where we started the rendezvous.
And I know he was with us the whole trip. So it's just, and the Missouri parks have maintained this. They've kept everything in place that Joe put there. So it's really cool, neat to see. And I stopped for lunch. That's where I sat and had lunch that day. So it was fun. Here is, I'll need help, Norm. Rob and Connie.
Yeah, Colter.
Yeah, they are river angels. They are, again, just the most amazing people. And I had pulled in and stayed there at, is it Washington? What's the name of the town?
Waverly. He lives
Waverly.
in Waverly. Yep.
Waverly. And there's a campground there, and they have a pit toilet. And Rob took me in. I was able to buy him breakfast. We sat around and caught up with stuff. But just literally 12 miles downstream from Waverly is Hill Island. And Hill Island is Rob's most special place on the planet. And he said, I know you're doing miles and this and that, but you ought to take some time and just spend a day at Hill Island. And I did. I thought, that's what this trip is about. So that was my 2-hour day. I paddled for 2 hours, got down there, set up camp. Especially in low water year, there's sand everywhere. It was gorgeous. And so after supper, I walked around the island. It's pretty big. And on the southeast corner, I came upon all this mayhem. It looked like somebody had been out there with a shovel digging for pirate treasure for a week. There were holes everywhere. And the more I started looking at it, the more I figured out what it was. And if you look right down here, you'll see some tracks. Those are blue heron tracks. And if you look, I looked around more, raccoon tracks, turkey tracks. These are turtle nests. And the turtles had a hatch. and I found evidence of their eggs. And then you can see this right here. These are little turtle tracks. One guy got out of the sand and made his way I followed those tracks all the way down to the river. So I don't know I've seen it on TV, but it was really cool to see, here was nature playing out. Not all these turtles made it, but turtles live for a long time. So as long as one or two make it, they'll be good for the next 50 years. And there must have been 100 different holes out here. This is a really well used, the turtles must be using this for years, and just cool to see Mother Nature play out and have some fun. But I got to see turtle nest and little baby turtle tracks. The other thing is when you get down to New Haven. So you remember when I was in the gates of the mountain, I stayed at John Colter camp area, and Colter is buried down here. And what was really neat is at some point, New Haven wanted to commemorate having John Colter there. Because did I tell the story last time of John Colter?
I don't think so.
So John Colter was a private in Lewis and Clark's brigade. And he actually, at least all the notes I've read, Norm, I'm going to give you some time here too, but at least what was the stuff I've read is that he was one of their more prized scouts because he knew how to hunt. He was very much a mountain man. But he settled after all his running around, he settled down here. And this is a piece of granite from Montana. If you remember Jim and Phyllis, the River Angels that got me around at Great Falls, Jim found this rock, had it engraved, and then it got shipped down. So again, the connection of the river people. But John Colter, after he got released by Lewis and Clark, honorably discharged, he and another guy were up in the middle of Montana. John Colter is actually, I believe, one of the first white men to ever see Yellowstone. But the Blackfeet heavily resisted the invasion of the white settlers. And he and a buddy were up there trapping, and a party of Blackfeet came upon them, told them to stop and freeze. John Colter's buddy ran and was killed immediately. John came in, they stripped him down, and they asked, "Are you a good runner?" And he lied. He said, "No, I'm a very slow runner." Well, he was not. And so the Blackfeet crew made a game out of this. Said, "You start running, and we'll see if we can catch you and kill you." And he escaped them. He hid underneath a beaver dam. He walked naked without shoes 200 miles to the nearest fort. So this guy was amazing. Apparently, Norm, what did he do for Lewis and Clark? Because I know the write-ups are really cool.
Yeah, he was one of their principal hunters. Lewis and Clark hired 7 men from Kentucky, and he was one of them. Yeah, you pretty much nailed it. He was one of the first early mountain men in this region, and worked for I think it was the Missouri Fur Trade Company, and was back up in this area in, in 1810 with George Drouillard and John Potts and a lot of the people from the Missouri Fur Trade and ex-members of Lewis and Clark, etc. They actually had a fort established at Three Forks, but the Blackfeet ran them out. And long story short, Colter was just basically really tired of dealing with the Blackfeet, and like you said, he settled there in New Haven and died in pretty young age. I think he was dead by 1918 or 1819. So
he lived a rough life. I mean,
yeah.
he saw it all, which was really cool. But yeah, it's an amazing story. And I was just tickled that, Jim, my river angel, helped make this piece of granite come down here. And I got to see it all over again. So very, very cool. And then there's these two guys. So in New Haven, there is the Astro Glass Shop. And I'm a retired materials engineer. And so I drove, Lance is on the right, I'm in the middle, Gary on the left. I drove these guys crazy because I love glass blowing. I just don't know how to do it. These guys are master craftsmen. The things they do are amazing. And so I spent 2 or 3 days in New Haven just resting, running around town. The campground's right there. They've got showers. I got to go and sit and watch these guys operate for a couple of days. One of the things you get to do as a through paddler, though, that's really, really special is you sign the wall and blow a ball. And so you get to blow a glass ball, 2 of them actually, And one of them, these guys ship home, so you have something to commemorate your trip from. And then I think between Norm and Dave Miller, there's now the excuse me, where you get this little purple flag and you get a purple hat that commemorate. So we all have purple hats like Norm has on, though his is way more faded. Mine never going to be, because mine's staying and going to be kept very pristine. But it's just, you get at this point, these guys are awesome. I was trying to figure out, how do I thank my son and a couple people, and I just had commissioned them to make me some glasses. And they asked, I specified the color, and I said, you make the design. You would be, what they made was amazing. So if you're ever in New Haven, you've got to go to the Astro Glass shop. These guys are just crazy, crazy cool. The other trick is Annie Baltazar happened to roll in when I was in there that day. And that's when I learned about Hog Bayou. And we're going to talk about Hog Bayou here at the end of the presentation. But she gave me one little more jewel on the trip that I got to incorporate. So, but if you're in there, go see Astro Glass. These guys are just, they are master craftsmen. No one else can do things that they can do. And of course, then there's the Paddle Stop Brewery. So Shane and Stacy, they're at Paddle Stop. There's my hat. I was in there charging up radios and things. Having their red beer. I forget what the red is called, but it is really good. I had way too much of it, but then again, I just had to stumble back to a tent, so I didn't have to worry about driving or paddling anywhere. So again, New Haven, really special place for the paddlers. Wonderful town, lots of history, and get to see a lot of things. And this was a picture, not mine. One of the guys was out. Excuse me. You see this tree right here. I'm actually camped right there. This is where the campground is, but it had rained on us. And of course I didn't care, because I was sitting in the brewery drinking a beer, but somebody was out and got this picture taken and posted up. Tony C, we'll say. And this is probably the one picture I'm going to turn into a puzzle. I think this would look really cool as a puzzle to take apart. So, and then the last of the people that were able to come out, this is Dan Streeter and Mark Fingerhut. And Mark's actually a through paddler. Norm, he started on the Yellowstone, right?
Yeah, on the Madison River, just west of Yellowstone National Park, and descended the Madison, Missouri to St. Louis.
Came all the way. And so these guys knew I was on the river. And as you can see from this picture, this is in the middle of a rainstorm. I mean, it was raining cats and dogs. These guys didn't care. They came out to paddle with me anyway. And they both paddle this section of the river a lot. And so some of the sandbar knowledge I got for the next couple of days, I didn't have to look at my maps. I just knew where I was going, because Dan and Mark gave me some great information. It was a lot of fun to paddle with them. Here's the other thing. If I wasn't going to finance the trip by basketballs, I was going to finance the trip by coolers. Oh my God. The coolers just must fall out of people's hands. I don't get it. All I would have to do is sterilize almost all these. They'd be fine. I'm missing lids. I'd have to go buy lids, but there were coolers, especially like this one here in the left. All it needed was cleaned out. There's nothing wrong with that cooler, or this one here in the middle, this red one. It's just one of those weird things, like, why are all these coolers sitting up on the shore? But there were an awful lot of them. So that got me down to the confluence. Pretty cool day. Yeah, I turned into a fourth grader again. I was jumping up and down as much as you can, sitting in a kayak. I got to the confluence. And at that point, pretty happy. What I didn't know was the next 400 miles would be pretty rough. I would consider it the hardest part of the trip. I'd already done 2,600 miles. I'm about to deal with the biggest barges I've ever seen. The river's a mile wide. It was very hot. I had very little rain, which is great because I hate being wet, but it was hot. And you're just grinding. You're just putting in miles. You're mile after mile. When you get past the confluence, you have a choice. We talked about this last time a little bit. You can go through the navigation channel, which is to the east of Chain of Rocks, or you take, it's a 7 or 8 mile piece of river down to the Chain of Rocks. I had never seen the Chain of Rocks in person. As a whitewater guy, I'm thinking, ooh, we could go run this. And then I did some reading. It's full of rebar. It's an old dam. It's a mess. It has a long history of a lot of civilization around this part of the river. Barges can't go through. And you wouldn't want to run this. I do have whitewater friends that run it at certain levels. And you heard Scott last time, but when he ran it in 2019, the water was very high, so he could run through it safely. But you get over in River Left, it's not the greatest portage, but I portaged around it. But it was cool to see. Last year or the year before, some guy had stuck his sailboat out on this. He somehow didn't realize he had to go down the nav channel instead of this. They were going to go out and salvage that boat, and when they got out there, it was gone. So as far as everybody knows, it's on the bottom of the river someplace. So, but that very impressive chunk of water and rock sitting right in here, which brings you down. And if you look way up here, that's Chain of Rocks. This is Mosenthine Island. And this was the beauty of a low water year. Normally there would be water going around this side of the island. It's just miles, acres and acres and acres of sand. I could camp wherever I wanted. It was kind of windy this night, so I nestled back up against the tree line, just sat there and watched the world go by. It was really cool. But this is the type of camping, once you get off the Missouri, down on the Mississippi. And the Mississippi on a low water year was really showing off its sandbars. Pretty cool. I got to see the arch. I've been in it, been around it, been below it. Now I got to see it from the river. So that was a pretty cool moment. And then I got to see barges. This is a 4x7. This was pretty typical. The biggest barge I saw was a 7x7. That was a coal barge, and they're a little smaller than what this was. The coal barges aren't as big. You stay out of the way of these guys. They rule the river. They can't stop. The tows that push these, these are grain barges. They're empty. He's pushing it up to go get it filled. They can push or they can reverse, but they don't have any side maneuvering. So they do what a lot of people call the Mississippi slide. So when they came into a corner, just like a race car driver, they would slide around that corner and keep going, which was really good because I just went to the inside of bends. They went to the outside and never had any issue. At low water year, it wasn't going to matter whether I was on the outside or the inside of the bend. The current, the river was uniform. And this just worked out to my advantage. You can see the kind of wave they kick up. Big 6-7 foot swells. And a whitewater boat, I could have been out there surfing. Pretty easy to stay away from. You can hear those diesels, that low vibration hum many miles away, and just stay out of the way. And they look at you. One thing, I'll speak of it now. We'll talk about it maybe more. A lot of folks had talked about taking a marine radio. And I know up above on the Mississippi going through the locks, the marine radios are very valuable. You can talk to not canals, the locks, the lock masters and get your way through. Down here though, what's very interesting is they are on channel 13 or 16, but to most of the riverboat captains, it's white noise. Because unless you call the boat by name or you talk about the specific river mile you're in, there's lots of chatter on these radios. And so they listen for themselves or their location. But if I would call out and say, hey, barge, I'm down. If I didn't call out their name, I would never get an answer. And I didn't want to run my cell phone. On your cell phones, if you run something called Ship Finder, it will show you all the barges' names and all the tows, and you can talk to them. I just made the choice of, I didn't run my marine radios down on the Mississippi. I just did everything by hand signals, talking to them, just because I saved on batteries. Lots of the through paddlers do charge up and are on the marine radios, and it can add to your trip because you can have some great conversations with these people. And it's another way to stay safe. But you don't need a marine radio. You can do it without. Either way, it's an interesting aspect, but you do stay out of the way of these waves because they will swamp a boat if you're not careful. Here is the only Missouri State Park on the river that you can at least get to easily as a boater. This is Trail of Tears, Missouri State Park. Wonderful, wonderful place. Easy. It's about maybe a 1/16 of a mile to go up the ramp to this campground. Water, showers. In fact, you can kind of see, I am charging my electronics. Here's a cord hanging down from the electrical. Excuse me, very reasonably priced. I got to talk with people would come in and said, where's your car? And I point to my boat and it says, that is my car. And so I had lots of wonderful conversations with the folks in the campground. Again, just a great place. And I was able to walk up to the museum there. This is the Trail of Tears. This is where the U.S. relocated the Cherokee Nation out of the Carolinas to Oklahoma, and they of course made a trail. They walked the whole thing, and to a lot of destruction to the tribe in the way. Here in the park is the only known grave of a Native American from that trail. And it was just neat to go see the history and see a different aspect maybe of what we learned in school and stuff. So if you get down there, this is a park, even if you're just driving, this is a fun park to stop at and spend a day just hiking and going through the museum. One of the differences between the Mississippi and the Missouri is the Mississippi is a very much sanitized river. The Corps is keeping a 9-foot minimum deep channel, very wide for all the tows and the barges to go through. They have these fabricated concrete aprons that they can spread out and put on riverbanks to try to keep the river from where it's going. So lots of places it's kind of stale. However, you know, you do have places like this. And here was a beautiful sandbar. I'm about 50 foot up above the river, watching the tows go by. This was one of the days it was extremely hot. I quit about 1 o'clock and I set up my tent up there and I got my chair and sat in the shade and just enjoyed the day watching it go by. So the sandbars on the Mississippi are really special, very neat to interact with and be on. To the point of, I finally figured out what these were after talking to my naturalist buddy. These are turtle tracks. And you can see the turtle's tail that he drug along as he was walking up. I never did get up close here in the Midwest, especially in Iowa. When you're out and about on the rivers, the turtles will get up on the logs to sun themselves, and you can get fairly close. I never got close to a turtle on the Mississippi, and I was being very quiet. They are very aware of their surroundings. So while I never did see them hauled up on the sand, I did see where they had been. And so this was one of the sandbars I camped on one night, and I was able to capture these pictures where a turtle crawled up here and kind of squiggled and wiggled, and eventually he went back down to the water. And the last of my snakes, if you remember last time I saw that gopher snake up at Colter, I saw 3 more snakes besides him. 2 of them were little northern water snakes about the diameter of my thumb. The 4th snake, I don't know what he was because a blue heron was eating him at the time. He was blue heron's breakfast. And then I found this guy out on a sandbar when I was collecting wood, and I was very careful. I never had an issue. I didn't know what he was, but I treat all snakes as if they're venomous. This is a southern banded water snake. They are not venomous. He looks like he's actually eaten something. So I think he was just hiding until he got, breakfast or supper completely digested. He's a little thick in here, but he was real cool to see. I took a picture and he went one way and I went the other. I think he just stayed put because he wasn't moving too much. This was right as sundown was happening too. Again, I talked about being up on the rendezvous with the MORP crew. And one of the things that's real cool is, at least on the way down, Memphis, Natchez, and Vicksburg are the big 3 towns that are still part of the riverbank. Everybody else has moved back, moved away. Floods have pushed them around. But Natchez under the hill is down there. And this is the ramp. This is the steepest boat ramp I have ever seen in my life. Oh my God, I see Ann shaking her head because like hauling a boat up here in your portage cart is like, really? I'm going to unload. I finally unloaded it and did it in stages rather than trying to do it at once. Up here to the left near the top of the ramp back this way is the most ginormous sycamore tree I've ever seen in my life. And what's funny is Annie and Dave Forbes, and I took a picture of that and posted it, and a whole bunch of people, I camped under that tree. So this is a great place to camp. However, I did one better because Jim Emanuel suggested I do this. There at the top, the Under the Hill Saloon, above it is the Mark Twain rooms. And Mark Twain actually stayed in these rooms. I took 2 days. It took 2 0 days. It wasn't cheap, but I wanted to do it. So I stayed in the same room that Mark Twain did. Really cool. Walked around town, got meals, found the ice cream place. I went there 2 or 3 times, of course, just for the sole benefit of getting calories, not that I like ice cream or anything. The one downside to this room is the room that overlooks the river and is where Mark Twain stayed is right above the bar. And when you make the reservation, they tell you it's above the bar. It will be noisy, until 2 a.m. when they close the bar. What they didn't tell me is on Tuesdays, they do karaoke, really bad karaoke. And so I was up till 2 listening to horrible karaoke, but it was well worth it. It was a neat experience to be part of it and go down in the saloon. The saloon has so much character, very, very cool. It's been here for a long time, so there's a lot of neat history to see. And from there, this is where the rendezvous really helped. I had a choice. You can go down from Natchez to Baton Rouge and down to Venice Marina. And then you go to mile marker 0 on the Mississippi, and you still have another 10 miles out to the Gulf. And of course, there's pretty limited camping. You're paddling back upstream. A lot of through paddlers on the Mississippi or the Missouri will hire a charter to come out of Venice Marina to pick you up so you don't have to go back up. Or you can, and Ann did, I know Dan's done both these legs, but Annie had told me, you should go down the Atchafalaya. And what's really cool is it cuts about 150 miles off the trip. You're not seeing the really big ocean traffic that you see down New Orleans. And at down New Orleans, all you're going to see is levees. And I didn't have to paddle upstream. So I decided I'm going through the old lock. And I thought, wow, this is the only lock I can go through. This would be kind of cool. But before we do that, we're going to talk about a little bit of history. So the Mississippi River has been much further west than where it is today. In fact, where Morgan City is now, that used to be the Delta. The Mississippi, they say about every 5 to 10,000 years, just starts to wander. It moves back and forth, creating what it normally does. And at some point, the Mississippi and the Red River were parallel to each other. Then the Mississippi did one of these big wanders, and one of its meander bends intercepted the Red. So the Red became a feeder to the Mississippi, and the Atchafalaya became a distributor. And I'm going to move this little thing over. There we go. What happened, though, is back in the late 1800s, this was called Turnbull's Bend. This was a pain in the butt because the riverboats coming up here, they would have to get around this bend, plus they're going into the current from the Red. So apparently I have to move something else. Okay, here we go. So what they did is Colonel Shreve, who's the founder of Shreveport, did what we all do as people, is let's just make a cut through here. And then the people won't, steamboats won't have to go around. This will be real easy. The problem with that is the Atchafalaya sits at a lower gradient than the Mississippi. And as soon as we made this cut, the Mississippi's not stupid. The Mississippi said, hey, I think I'm going to go west. I always wanted to go west. I've been west. I'm going to go back the other way. And so the Corps of Engineers estimated that if they didn't do something by the mid 1950s and try to manage the river in this area, that New Orleans would be a dry port. The river would have moved west and just left New Orleans sitting there. So what they did is they created some control structures. So they've got big control structures up here and the lock and dam down here. There's an interesting book. In fact, I'm going to grab it and I just show everybody. Someone had suggested this book, which is called The Control of Nature by John McPhee. And he has a chapter in here on the Atchafalaya. This book came out in 1989. Everything he said in here can be echoed in what has happened between 1989 and 2022. In 2011, the Mississippi River almost destroyed the control structures, tried to blow them out. They also came in and we spent millions of dollars on something that someday the Mississippi is going here. It's just, we'll wait and see, but we don't control the river. But I thought this will be fun. I'm going that way. Here's one of the control structure that was severely damaged. They have put it back into place, but if we ever get a flood like 2011 or 2019 again, there's no saying that the river won't take this thing out. They came real close to losing it in 2011. So here's the lock that I wanted to go through. So Dave Forbes got a hold of me en route. He says, oh, by the way, the lock is under construction till November. Oh, man, that's the only lock I could go through. And it was cool to see the whole lock gates down on a barge here and they're fixing it. But so I just put everything on my portage cart and I portaged over to the other side. But then I get over here and you come in up here down through Seamsport, all the way down towards Crow Springs, some just really cool places. This is the biggest remaining wetland in the United States. It's about 150 miles to get down here. It is just gorgeous, gorgeous country. And there's my friend, my big friend. Everyone, when I told them I was going to the Atchafalaya, they automatically said, oh, wow, you got to worry about gators. Well, gators look at a boater and they judge a boater by his size as if it's a fellow gator. So there's very little chance these gators are going to attack you. The other trick is gators associate people with being eaten. And the week before gator season is closed, I saw the remnants. There were still gator pools out. This guy, since I don't make any noise paddling, and he is the biggest, he's the apex predator down here. He was up there sleeping until he figured out I was close by. And then he jumped into the water, disappeared, never saw him again. Not only did I see him, I saw his brother and his other brother. So there were some big, big gators out there. This is the area where they shoot swamp people. So when you're watching swamp people and you think some of the scenery and the gator stories are made up, no, they're not. They're real. This is the only guy that gave me a scare. I got probably a little too close. I was just coasting along. I wanted a good picture. He slid off into the water, and normally they're gone. He came back up 20 feet from me, all 3 foot of his head. And I've not had that big of adrenaline rush in a long time. But then he just went back underwater and disappeared. So luckily, no big deal, but very cool to see the alligators and lots of the other wildlife down here. The second to the last day, this was my campground. In fact, and you guys went farther down. This is just above where you guys camped. I forget you camped at the beginning of, or the head of Yellow Bayou. This is maybe 2 miles above that. And I found a neat little spot. I got in, I chased a couple 5-foot alligators off here, and I thought, great, nice and shady, very few mosquitoes. I cooked supper, and then I did my usual. I wandered around to see what I could take pictures of. And I found this. I wear a size 12 shoe. The alligator wears a size 14. So I am very glad I didn't meet him, but this was another cool memory for the trip, is just that's how big their feet are. When you get these big guys, the record alligator in the US is 19 feet. And what I saw were probably only 14 or 15 feet long, but they were impressive. So, and then to see this footprint was even more cool. When you're on the Atchafalaya, it is cypress trees everywhere, Spanish moss. This is the corner of going down into Wax Lake. You make a turn, these kind of mark that corner. Really cool to see birds everywhere, fish jumping around. And you get down to here. Now, this is where Annie had told me, hey, take Hog Bayou. I could have gone down Wax Lake, and this is a direction Jim Emmanuel had told me about. And I could have, there's my cursor. I could have popped out here onto the Gulf. And then you go down around this point here and then up to Burns Point. But this is only about an hour and a half to paddle through here. Don't have to rush. It's got good water. The day this was my last day, I had a wind out of the east, and I didn't know what I was going to have for ocean swells. And so it just made sense. On the backside of this point, I was protected. So I was getting a 2-for-1. I wasn't going to have to deal with whatever was going on in the ocean. Plus, I got to go through a very cool, neat little bayou. And back in here, you got plants like this. This is arrowhead plant. They were in bloom. There's bees and flowers everywhere. Very cool to see. I always say this wrong. I call it hydrangea, but that's not it. It's high something or other. This is an invasive species. This was brought over from Japan in the late 1800s. It is everywhere down there. It's not supposed to be there. It does some good things. It does some bad things, but it was in flower when I went through, and really cool to see all these beds and the insects working them. So that was, despite it being an invasive species, there was a plus to seeing it. This was what you go through when you're in Hog Bayou. You got wild cane on one side, little trees. There is no solid ground in here. I got thinking if I'd ever messed up. And I remember when Ann and Jay went through, I'd seen their video before I got there. You guys were about 3 days or 4 days in front of me, or at least video wise. I remember, like, there's no place to camp. I better not get stuck, because otherwise you're sitting on an oil platform, which is probably trespassing. But luckily you get through here in a day if you do your planning correct. Here's the last weird stuff. So I had plotted a little bit of a waypoint to make sure I got through here. And you can kind of see my track as I'm going through Hog Bayou. And I got to this point right here. And I looked at this and said, well, hey, I can take a shortcut. And of course, the track doesn't match the water specifically, but this loop I avoided and I saved 2 miles. Now my GPS, every time I get a text, would ring. And I had no idea how many people were following me on my last day. I now know that a lot of people were, had 2 monitors at work. One monitor was doing work and the other was watching Hillman plod along the river along this way. I got to this point and I went this way. And you'd thought my GPS was on steroids. It sat there and buzzed for 5 minutes. Now, I don't ever look at it, but when I got off the water and looked, everyone's going, wrong way, wrong way. You took a left turn. You should have went the other way. And I'm thinking, geez, people, 3,700 miles in 4 months. You'd think I know how to navigate at this point. So that was the last of the good jokes that I had on the trip, was just this last little turn. Let's see if this works. I don't know. You guys might tell me if you can hear anything. I don't know if
No audio.
I don't know if the audio went through or not, but it didn't. I was pretty happy. It was a really cool day. I was jumping around like a fourth grader as much as you can in your boat without tipping it over. Oh, hold on. There we go. So the last couple things before we wrap this up. Dave Miller has a last chapter in his book, and it's something as a through paddler you can relate to. Is how do you describe a trip? How do you wrap it up? And part of it's very easy. Part of it's the physical side. And you go through the physical, you learn to deal with all the problems, wet and hot and dry and this and that. And then there's a part where you just can't, you are changed. These trips change you fundamentally in a lot of ways. And this is a line out of my favorite movie. And I think this comes as close as I can to describing what the trip means when you do a whole trip like this and come off the river. There's just something magic about sitting on a sandbar. No one's around you, as far as you know, for 1,000,000 miles, and just listening to the world and watching the sun go down. So yeah, you really want to do one of these trips. They are magical. A couple thank yous. On the right, Dave Miller. I had always thought about doing the Mississippi, and after I looked at Dave's book, I went to the Missouri. Harder, longer trip, or at least clearly longer, but I thought it was a blast. I'm glad I went that direction. And of course, Norm there on the left. Norm is the founder of our MORP web Facebook page. Unbelievable compilation, just tons and tons and tons of data and maps and stories. And when you want to do one of these trips, all the information to help you form what your trip will be. And I'm here. Dave may have never gone down to the Gulf, but his book went all the way with me. So, and as you can see, I was pretty skinny when the time I got done with it. And that's my last picture. I was 124 days and it was a blast. It was really, really cool. So with that, that's it, Norm. I'd say we can open it up for questions and see, unmute everybody and see if people have questions or comments or thoughts.
Yeah. I got some questions, but I'll rather start with some of the people that might be heading out this year. So who's got some questions? Go ahead and unmute yourself and ask away.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah.
Dave, what did you use for maps other than your in-service?
So the top half from Three Forks down to, I would say, Lake Sac. I used hard maps. In fact, I got a really good map from the Interpretive Center there in Fort Benton. Shoot me an email and I'll send you the maps. I've got the pictures of them. They're available online. Those maps I found really good. I tell you, once you get to Fort Peck and down, the GPS really is a better way to go. I took a master class to learn how to use my GPS better than I had. Once I got used to realizing that 1 inch on my screen was not 1 inch out in front of me, the scale of going from your GPS to real world is a little bit, it throws you off a hair. But I just use GPS. And I didn't lay in a daily track. I put in a start point and an end point. And I might have put in, I'm going to get to this point today. And if I don't make it, I might get to this point. I put in 2 or 3 potential camping spots, and I just hit whatever I hit. I never let it, I early on got out of, I've got to get to this place. I just, if I was tired that day, I stopped early. If I felt good, I kept going. But, especially in Missouri, where is New Haven? Where is Chamois? Waverly? Where was Hill Island? And I put in those important points that I want to stop here and I want to stop here. Otherwise, I just looked at it and just, as several of the through paddlers said, river goes downstream, just go downstream. So I solely, after Fort Peck, was using my GPS and I was not using maps, and that's to each their own. You can get some very, very good maps of each river mile for the Mississippi that are very detailed and very useful. I met 2 or 3 of the Mississippi paddlers when I was coming down, and JC, I don't remember all of JC's last name, but JC and I crossed paths on the river. Say it.
It's Jean Cano.
There we go. Thank you. And he had some really cool maps he was using. And then he had his radios out. So he was talking to people since he had the river miles and the maps. I didn't do that. But yeah, maps also get wet. There's something else to take. GPS was always on my body, and I could look at it anytime I needed to.
Next question. Someone?
Dave, it sounded like you hit a lot of campgrounds and all. I'm kind
I
of
did.
wondering, I'm bringing a debit card and credit card, but cash, how much? I mean, I'm assuming a lot of those campgrounds, you got to put $10 or $15 in an envelope or something.
Exactly.
Actually, cash did you go through on this trip?
Not very. So I had my credit card with me. I also had about $200 in cash, which actually lasted easily between resupply points. I got some more cash at Wilson. I got some more. So I resupplied at Tobacco Garden, at Wilson Island, and at Memphis. And I picked up about $200 of cash at each time. I never went through all my cash that way. The state parks, you can use a credit card, but a lot of these little ones, you bet, it's just self-fill out an envelope, put $5 or $10 in it, put it in the kiosk. They can't, there's no place for a credit card. And so I did that. You don't need a lot, but it's the other trick is sandbars. I hate camping. I wanted a pit toilet, and I wanted showers, and I wanted a picnic table, and I wanted to charge up. Not that being on the sandbars, I learned, especially in the Mississippi, there's not a lot of campgrounds. So I learned to love it both ways. I make fun that I hate camping, but it's just the people in the campgrounds are neat to see. The sandbars are neat to see, but yeah, bring mostly anywhere from the campsites where you just needed cash would be $5 or $10. Most of them are $5. And if you weren't using electricity, some of them you could camp for free. It's only if you were going to use electricity did they want a little bit of a donation. So
Well, you
a lot of
answered
them are
my
free.
question. I mean, that was kind of what my gut feel was a couple $100 and, just hit an ATM when you need more. But
And I will recommend you memorize your credit card number, because I kept my wallet and stuff buried so that I wouldn't ever lose it. And of course, when you're pulled in first in, you're going to register. I don't want to walk back down to my boat or go dig around for it. So I had my credit card memorized, and that apparently impresses lots of the staff at the campgrounds that you can rattle off your credit card number and do that. I also had a couple campgrounds. They said, just go set up and come back up and see us. They trust you. And so at Chamberlain, I did that setup, came back up with my credit card. We took care of it that way. So yeah, a little bit of cash and a credit card.
Dave, can you expand on that a little more as far as maybe pointing out the distance between some of these organized or state park campgrounds? Because they aren't like always a day apart. You may be weeks or hundreds of miles apart. It's not like you're going to find them every day, correct?
Yeah, correct. Montana, they are spaced like Pruitt Creek. It's a campground, but it was one of the, you're probably 50 miles to 100 miles between campgrounds, from silos up on a canyon ferry down to the campground below the dam is 25 miles. And then you go another 4 or 5 to Spokane. But from Spokane down, I had probably 50 or 60 miles. There in Missouri, until you get to Chamois and Waverly and New Haven, you're out on the sandbars. From like Cooper's Landing.
You got
There's
Coopers.
probably,
Yeah, you got Coopers.
yeah, but below that, you got a good 70. So you got 2 or 3 days. It's easy to go 2 or 3 days and not see any civilization. And once you're on the Mississippi, that's even more spread out. So, like I only had the one there at Trail of Tears. There were others if I had a partner and could have left my boat safely and walked up the stuff from that end. But yeah, you need, I think that's one of the beauties of the trip too. If you want to hit those camps, you put, find their GPS coordinates, have it in your plans, or just wing it. And you're going along and, oh, okay, today I'm near one. I think I'll stop. Or no, I think I'll be on the sandbar. I know, Norm, you like sandbars, so you stayed in sandbars all the time.
Yeah, my 2004 trip, that was from St. Louis to the Pacific. So I went upstream and then did a month overland to the Columbia watershed. But I think I stayed in only 3 campgrounds in 6 months that I paid for. I preferred to not be around people. And Dave will expand on that, but I always found that there'd be a problem at a boat ramp, because that's usually where the high school drinking party is, and their 50 cars show up and they're down there until 3 o'clock and yelling and hollering, and you can't get any sleep, and they're, walking around your gear. So I like to avoid that. And Dave, you might want to expand on that. What did you do personally when you got to a boat ramp and walked to a town? Or
never walked to a town, never left my boat, never. I had too many people get their gear ripped off. As Norm says, they put a lot of boat ramps right next to the access of bridges because it's state land and they can do that. Unfortunately, that's where all the trouble congregates. So I only had one problem the whole trip. I was coming down to Cottonwood something or other. I thought a camp area. It turned out it was a day use area. And so I thought, well, it was the end of the day. I wasn't going anywhere else. There was no good sand at that point. And so I camped below the high water mark outside the day use area. So on this trip, the only state that you can't camp, every other state except Nebraska, you can camp up to the high water mark. Since I had a low water year, I had lots of campgrounds. Nebraska, the state law is that they own the ground underneath the water. So you can't camp anywhere on the Nebraska shore without violating trespassing. So I just stay off it. There's plenty of places you can always stay off it. But I was sitting at Cottonwood Grove, and I was down below, and the Fish and Wildlife guys came by. They're checking some fishermen, and they looked at me, and I said, "Am I okay here?" Since it was only a day camp, you weren't supposed to camp there. And says, "No, you're below water. You're good, and we wouldn't kick you out anyway," because they knew who I was. I was a through boater. But then they looked at me and said, "Can you defend yourself?" And I kind of, "Can I defend myself?" And I says, I have a knife. I don't carry weapons." It turns out that they had kids coming down into this park, drinking and raising hell at night. And he said, "Just keep your boat down near the water. Your tent's green. You're out of sight. I think you'll be okay, but just heads up." Sure enough, 1 a.m, here comes Highway to Hell, beating on somebody's stereo, cranking, and I could hear them. The kids came in. I hear, "Oh shit, there's a tent. Someone's watching us," and they left. So that was the only time I even had a close call. But Norma's right. I would never stay near a bridge, a boat ramp that's part of a bridge. Get into campgrounds. There's so many sandbars, especially if it's not looking like it may be a great water year again. Just get out and in the middle of away from things. It is worth it. And there'll be times when you're going to hit the campgrounds, like West Whitlock in South Dakota was a wonderful place to stay. And I spent 2 days there because I did one wind day. There's other campgrounds that you can hit. Just I would plan out what campgrounds you want to hit, look at the maps and get the GPS, and the others just wing it and have fun and enjoy it. Because again, you don't have a schedule.
Any more questions? 'Cause I got a few if no one has any.
I have
Yeah.
a question.
Annie, go ahead.
So I might paddle for a couple weeks with Annie, and she is leaving Three Forks on June 6th.
Mhm.
So the water will be cold.
Oh,
And
yes.
I'm sensitive to neoprene, so I can't, the cuffs of a dry suit. Did you use a dry suit, or did you
Nope.
just have very insulated clothes? I do have a wetsuit.
I wouldn't wetsuit, especially if you're going to paddle together. So I took some risk in the fact that I have a dry suit as a whitewater paddler. I have both dry suits and wetsuits. It was nice enough that I didn't need that. I did have a very heavy rain jacket. And if you remember that first 3 weeks, I got rained on a lot. I had neoprene pants. So between the rain jacket and neoprene pants, I was fine. Where I got into trouble is when, okay, what am I doing in the tent? Well, I'm wearing swimming trunks and a t-shirt buried in the bottom of my sleeping bag. I should have had at least one more something heavy to put on when I was in camp, and I didn't plan well enough. I think they're called splash pants. Whitewater folks, we call them splash pants. Even if you just had heavy wool and you get rained on, you'll be fine as long as you got a way to be dry at the end of the day. What's really cool, if you're going to be with her from Three Forks for the first, 3 weeks, you're going through gates of the mountains.
I know
It's going to be so cool. Oh. But yeah, I go with wool. If neoprene and some of the synthetics fibers don't, in your body don't get along real well, just go with wool. Stay away from neoprene. The real trick is you've done it. You've been in this seat. What do you wear to paddle in rain? And if you start 1st of June, the temperature should be above 50 most of the time. And then you just got to be able to get dry at night. And that was my problem. I could get dry, but I didn't really have enough layers to put on after I got out of the wet stuff. So I should have had one more set of dry pants or dry top just as extra clothing for the first part of the trip.
Yeah, I usually carry a lot of layers. So, Norm, do you have anything to say about that?
Yeah, I don't own a dry or a wetsuit. I paddled, the earliest I got on the Missouri last year at Three Forks was the 10th of March. That was an unusual time because we had 70 degrees in March. Then it went back down to winter for quite a while till May. I think since the river is not extremely deep, you'll be paired up with Annie. And the fact that it's a narrow river, if you have a ditch bag of some sort that if you went over, you could, warm clothes, fire starter, you're gonna be okay. I can't see, and it's very rare to actually hear of anybody, especially long distance paddlers. I don't recall any of them flipping over early. I can't, I would have to think for an hour or two if that's ever happened. I think, as Dave was saying, what you're going to deal with is just the weather coming down, not the water down here. It's dealing with possible snow or rain. Just have good rain gear and being able to stay warm. I think you'll be fine. And I'm hoping to paddle with you and Annie too for a little ways. So
Good.
yeah,
I hope it works out.
Oh yeah, I think it will.
Well, and again, if anybody wanted, I don't know if we can make it happen, but if you need a resupply at Wilson Island on the western edge of Iowa, give me some kind of notice and I'll do my everything to get over there and help you resupply and stuff. Because Wilson's, it's a reasonable spot to stop as you come down from Sioux City. In terms of the park, doesn't cost very much for tent sites. They have water. The showers are not the cleanest. South Dakota showers, South Dakota and North Dakota parks are the best things I have ever seen makes Iowa look horrible. Again, a shower is a shower and been on the river for a long time. So
Yeah.
I have another question. Dave, your trip last year, 2022, we're in the middle of social media. It's everywhere. Facebook, Instagram, cell phones, GPS, the technology is out there. How much of that did you rely on in your trip as far as learning safety or learning something ahead or letting people know what was going on? And more specifically, did you reach out to the other long distance paddlers that were either ahead of you or behind you and sort of keep tabs on intel? Because obviously if someone's a week ahead of you, they're going to know something about something that's coming up. They may say, hey, don't stop at that bridge, they're fixing it or whatever. Did you
Yeah.
rely on social media and or contact with like Steve Snell or Larry Bamer or Dave Haggard, any of those guys that also did the river last year?
No, so a couple things. One, I intentionally unplugged.
Yeah.
My cell phone really didn't do me any good in Montana. I had my GPS, and I always put your GPS on your life jacket. Because if your GPS is on your boat's going downstream, they'll go save your boat, they won't save you. That GPS needs to be on your body because that's the most important place. So Norm, I relied very heavily on my GPS in terms of just where I was, at least the first half part with those maps and my GPS. But I didn't have coverage. And part of it was I wanted to unplug a little bit. I didn't play my music. As a whitewater paddler, we'd listen to the river because the rapids talk to you. The river talked to me the whole trip. I knew when tugs were coming. I saw wildlife I would have missed. I had earphone, music in my head. I just tried to immerse in it. The other thing is I'm a little bit weird because as an ACA instructor, I've had wilderness first aid. So I know a dozen different ways to fix broken legs and everything else that goes on from that end. So I have, as an instructor, I've got to have it. I had the GPS was my emergency plan. Every morning I told my son I'm on the river, and every evening I told him I'm off the river. I also put out the link. So I only thought 5 or 6 people were following me. It turns out there was a whole lot of my friends following me go down the river. So, and that's kind of fun. I'm hoping that this year's paddlers do have a link, because I will be looking at it every day, watching where you are and what you're doing and kind of reliving it. I think that GPS was really my link. Some people would send me a text at the end of the day, like, wow, you're going 10 miles per hour today. That's cool. And so that was the interaction. As far as my other paddlers, I think, Norm, from day to day, it changes so much. Steve and I talked back and forth quite a bit as we went down, because we were literally a day or two either side of it. Larry kind of came in and was right past us, so we didn't get much of a chance to talk to him. Once I was on the Mississippi, I was watching my Mississippi Through Paddlers blogs. And so when JC was there, I kind of knew, but I ran into 2 or 3 of the Mississippi Through Paddlers. No idea they were there. And like I said, it's an unwritten rule. If you don't go say hi to another paddler when you're on the river, you're going to get bad karma. And so I got to meet some really cool through paddlers. I remember when I had really good cell coverage, Jay and Ann's, that's when those videos on the Atchafalaya, Jay was posting them. I'm like, I'm going to be there in 2 days. And so I kind of got this preview of where I was going to be. In fact, that was very beneficial because and I remember you and Jay, like, we can't find any sandbars. And so I knew when I got to that section, it's going to be thin. Don't get too late in the day. So that helped. But yeah, Norm, if you do have contact, that is a good way to, hey, I had problems in this section, or there's construction or at this bridge, or I know Dave Forbes told me at the rendezvous, hey, the old lock down there to get to the Atchafalaya is under construction till November. You better bring your portage cart unless you want to make a bunch of trips. So that is an important aspect. I just didn't use it very much. I was relying on my GPS and my text almost all the time.
Good answer.
Yeah, that's a really interesting subject, because I've thought of this, and I am bringing a spot tracker, and but I wasn't planning on really sharing it for a couple of reasons. One, you're right. Social media, it goes out. You don't know who's going to be watching that link. And I'm going to be out there. My wife behind me is going to be here. I think I would, and it's a great idea, I think, that at least the through paddlers, that at least link to the other through paddlers. I wouldn't have a problem like Norm's sending you my link to send out, but I don't think I'm gonna like post it.
Yeah.
For general people, hey, follow me. And at the same time, leaving, Beth here by herself for 3 months. So.
Yeah, if
Yeah,
they
that's
think
an
they can
interesting-
find you, I wasn't too much worried about stalkers. No one knew what was going on back at the home, but I had a lot of my friends that wanted to follow, and that link out there. I am horrible at blogging. Some people are great about taking video and putting video, like and I still want to meet Jay sometime. He's an awesome. The videos he puts out are so cool. But I don't blog. I just don't. And my buddy Doug that dropped me off, every 3 days he would take a picture of my track on his Facebook and post it and say, well, here's where Dave was being chased by wild moose, and here's where a swarm of walleye. And he made it into this fun, where's Hillman or where's Waldo? And we had fun with it. There is some coolness to that I don't think I get too worried about the privacy of it from that side, but everyone's got to decide that on their own. But I found the GPS to be a good way to maintain interaction and still talk to people. There were a couple of days I was pretty beat, I was pretty low, and someone would text, hey, I saw your miles today, you did really well. And it pumped you up to get a text from somebody of what was going on. The other thing though is be careful of Spot. Spot does not have its greatest track record. I don't know. I know from my whitewater community, no one will use Spot. They're all using Garmin because the Spot has not been reliable as the Garmin has. But I've also had people that have used Spot very, very successfully. So do some digging on that to make sure that is the unit you want.
Oh, yeah, no, I've had it. We've used it on the 340.
Okay, cool.
And
Then
I
you're
mean,
good.
we have swamped it on the 340. I think we've swamped their servers when the 340 started one year because everybody had problems. I don't think they were ready for that amount of traffic all at once, at one time.
What do you
But
mean
no,
there's 400 people on the river? Well, there is. And get your system up there. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. But it's worked out for me. I don't think we've really had, I think there was one issue in the MR140 last year where I don't think it tracked me for like 20 miles or something like that. But I think that was my fault. I think it flipped over on my boat and it was upside down. And once I flipped it up, I don't know, it just started kind of tracking on its own all of a sudden. But
well, that's a good point, because when I went by the Air Force Base and the airport at Omaha, Kim Lynn's on. I think Kim's one of my river angels. Her and her husband James came and brought me Cheetos. I love them. They gave me some good Cheetos for the trip, and I got to see them at Wilson Island and then at the RV park below Omaha is where I stayed. The info sheet I gave to Norm has a lot of places, like the RV park below Omaha at I forget the name, Windsor Cove. They just let you camp. For the through paddlers, they won't charge you. It's something they do, the through paddlers, which is really, really nice. They just say, go take that campsite. Don't worry about paying, and we got you. So at least that's what they did for me. But when I was around the Omaha airport, my GPS stopped working. And I'm pretty certain it's because it was jamming. There's also a nuclear reactor. Nebraska's only nuclear reactor is up near the river above Omaha a few miles. I'm pretty certain they're jamming GPS there too. The next morning, I thought, oh, great, now my GPS is broke. It was just that section. And so as someone who has made GPS for the military, I'm pretty certain they were jamming our signal, which makes sense. They don't want random GPS going off near those places. So heads up, if you, on your way down past Omaha, you're going to see some issues right around there with GPS tracking along the way.
I got another question, if I may ask. David, I know you got a lot of experience whitewater boating and you were in a really stable sea kayak. I'm wondering if you could answer this question as if you had not much experience or were in a canoe. Last year, we actually had 5 solo paddlers go from Montana to St. Louis, and they were in canoes. And the question is, how did you plan your big lake reservoir crossings? Some of the bays that you had to cross where there was maybe 1, 2, 3, 4 mile gap there. What was the strategy and how you strategically thought about the safety aspect of it? And if you could kind of consider if you were in a canoe, because I know there's been some challenges with some of the canoes.
Yeah, because like Steve had his canoe decked. You can deck a canoe so it sheds water pretty well, but it will never shed like our kayaks will. So a couple things. I am always amazed when I go back and read the blogs out on the Missouri River website. I forget who it was, but one of our paddlers, the first time he ever paddled his canoe and took off on his journey is the day he put the boat on the water at Three Forks.
Yep. And
my answer to that is, I won't use the word, are you freaking nuts? Are you crazy? It's really interesting. The people that make up these long distance are either adventurers or paddlers. And paddlers handle the water just fine. It's myself being a paddler. I always freaked out about where am I going to stay at night? How do I go walk up to this house and knock on the door to get water? Versus the adventurers, that's real easy. They just go, oh, that tree in the corner where the river bends, is that bad? Is that called a strainer? It amazes me sometimes. So if you're going to do it in canoe, you need to really be good at canoeing. This is not a journey or a kayak. I really think I think most of the people that don't finish the trip underestimate the amount of paddle skill you need. When I got and I had very little big lake. I had some ocean experience with minimal big lake experience. The one thing I knew from my whitewater is look at the weather and stay upwind. You never want to be on the downside of the wind. And you had said last week, Norm, especially in Fort Peck, we stay to the north side because the wind is typically going from the north toward the south, from your left to your right. There were a few days, though, that I wanted to be on the south side. So I would look at my GPS, look at my wind, and it usually say there's going to be a wind shift at 11 o'clock, where it's going to go from the southwest to the northeast. Okay, cool. That's when I need to cross my big open water, or that's when I'm going to go across a big space between arms on the lake. Fort Peck is famous for that because the crossings are just huge. It's very discomforting to be out there when the water is just chewing and you're 2 miles away from anything, and that can happen to you. Oahe is bad, but Oahe at least is a little more river-like, a little more narrow. Both Sac and Peck are enormous. I had a Princess tour. When I came by on Lake Sac, Four Bears, I didn't stay. I ran diagonals all day that day. I went from Four Bears to the next point. I went from that point to Independence Point, 45s cutting across big water because I had the wind with me that day. So yeah, the way to handle big water is never get on the downside of the wind and watch your weather religiously. I made one big mistake up on Peck. It's called Duck Bay, and it's almost to the marina. And the wind was coming from behind. I was having a great day. That's when I still had open cockpit. I didn't have a cover. And so I thought I've got to stay on, 45 an angle. I got to keep working it. I let the wind drive me down into the bay. And then the waves crashing on the shore were so big, I was not getting launched back out. So I put the kayak on the cart. I portaged over the land, maybe a football field to the other side of the bay, and then was able to get out of it. And that's one case where I didn't pay attention. I misread the wind. The worst thing that would have happened there, I just would have sat on the shore until the wind stopped and then made my way. I was within, an hour of the marina at that point. That's part of the reason I got sloppy is I didn't have my GPS point set as well as I should have for the marina. Hindsight 2020, I'd have my marina waypoints in very well compared to what I was doing. I eventually got really good at it, but the first Fort Peck, I learned a lot on setting my waypoints and being good with that. Some of the camp areas in Fort Peck, the Pines is a great place to camp. There was 400 yards of shoreline to walk up to the campground because the lake was 20 feet low. So that was a low water disadvantage on that part. So yeah, wind, you got to stay upstream. And yeah, if you're in a canoe, I don't care what boat you're in, you need to be careful. I mean, you're out there by yourself. I'm paddling with someone, I'd been much better off. I think you can take a little bit more risk. You have another person to make judgments with and look at the weather and decide, is this a good idea? But when you're solo, yeah, because the water in June and the upper parts, it might have been in the low 50s. If I had to hang in that water more than an hour, I'd been hypothermic. I would have had cold water shock going in right away. Yeah, it's a lot of us don't think about it, but I think instinctively we are all taking care of that. And again, as an ACA instructor, I've been through that loop with what I teach my students and everything. So the lakes, if one doesn't have lakes, Canyon Ferry was tough. I got learned hard lessons. You know, I about sank trying to get over to the silos. There was no reason to be paddling into a headwind that day. I should have just sat. And I should have done a little more homework there. Should have done a little bit better.
Great answer. Appreciate it. Yeah, the big lakes, there was a, oh shoot, are you there?
Yeah, still here.
Yeah, we're still here.
We're still here.
I lost my camera. That's all right. There was a
We can still see you.
good. Okay. There was a couple guys last or 3 years ago that ended their trip at Fort Peck because they swamped and they crossed a bay. One of them talked the other one into it. They shouldn't have gone. They didn't have a spray cover or spray deck on their boat, and they got out in the middle of it and the waves are 7 feet and they tried to turn around and they swamped.
Yeah.
Long story short, if they didn't have their spot or locator beacon, they would have died without a doubt in my mind. When search and rescue got to the one guy, he was unconscious when they pulled him out of the water, and he didn't regain consciousness until they got him in an ambulance. I guess the point with my comment is I highly recommend the spot or inReach, locator beacons, especially if you're solo. It's nice to give people that live in that state, for example, maybe send me your spot. That way, if something does go awry and your family member is kind of curious about certain questions about that area, I might be able to answer them rather than trying to surf the net or something. I've had quite a few families over the years call me or, text me and say, I haven't heard from my husband in like 5 days. He's like usually good at calling. And I got on the weather thing and it's like, oh, it's a 30-mile southwest wind. He's windbound. I knew he was. And a day later, he calls his wife and said he's been windbound for 3 days. So it kind of helps people, maybe someone in North Dakota give me your spot in South Dakota. It just kind of helps peace of mind with family back home if they ever have any questions. And I'm definitely one to allow people to call me anytime and if they have any questions or concerns on any of the lakes. But
yeah, because as a whitewater paddler, even when we're doing day trips, we file a water plan with somebody. And my water plan for 4 months was I checked in every morning and I checked out every night. And I was pretty good. There was a couple nights where I was so tired I forgot to send Josh a message. And of course, the next morning he reminded me, yeah, I see you're back on. What happened to my message last night? And I'd have to say, sorry, kiddo, I forgot. We did make the joke about the sandbar, but it got to be that was the plan. The other is, and I learned it again, as a whitewater paddler, we didn't give a hoot about the wind. We're not on a schedule. We're just not on a schedule. And so if it looks halfway dicey, I mean, I talked last week about being sitting next to that cottonwood in the middle of a thunderstorm for 45 minutes. That was just plain stupid. I should have stayed in camp, let it blow by, figure out where it's going to go. And then, okay, I'm fine. And there's just no rush. There's no reason to put yourself in harm's way when you have, unless you're really, that's what I said, I wouldn't do these trips on a schedule. Enjoy them to the absolute fullest, because the chance of doing it twice, I'm not doing it twice. I may go, I'm really almost kind of tempted to go for my Tasca down to St. Louis so I can say I've claimed the whole watershed. But we'll wait a couple of years and wait and see. But it really is, again, I had a racing background, and the first week is like go, go, go. And it's like, wait a second, why are you doing this? Sit back and just take it all in. And even on the lake, so it's like, well, I should go today. No, there's going to be wind today. You're not going today. You're going to stay put. and then you just find ways to enjoy it. It's just, it's worth it. But yeah, most people get themselves in trouble by not letting the weather, they try to tell the weather what to do, and that's bad.
Right.
So on the big lakes, this is more to you, Dave, I guess, because you've probably more input from everybody that's done it. Sails. I know a few paddlers have used sails. How did that seem to work out for them?
So at Tobacco Garden, there's a sail there in the cabin if you want to use it. It's still there when I left, and someone had one with, and it was one of the pieces of equipment they didn't do. So what I found is interesting is, for the most part, for the kayakers, especially loaded, it comes down, I have never used a sail. It wouldn't have worked the way I was paddling. And you saw my numbers. I was doing 4 and 5 miles per hour just with my normal stroke rate. So I didn't have an issue. On the Rendezvous, I got to hang out with a couple of canoeists, and we had a really good tailwind one day. And I was working my butt off to keep up with them. Their bowman had their sail out there, and they're just sailing along, and I'm chasing them down. So it is, I think, 50-50. A lot of it is just, are you used to a sail? Do you know how to employ it? A sail could real easily flip you over if you're not comfortable with it.
Yeah. And I don't. The only thing I've ever sailed was a kite. So that's like high on my list this spring is to get some experience on it. But then the decision's going to be, is it going to be worth my while to even bring it, you know?
Yep.
Or is it going to sit, you know, bungeed to the deck the whole time?
Yeah, that's weight. You don't want to haul anything you're not going to make use of. It's just weight.
Yeah.
Any other questions, folks?
Dave, when you were on the Mississippi, did you go down the east side or the west side?
I went on the inside of the turns.
Okay.
I literally, so when I was on the Missouri, I stayed in the bends because I was getting advantage. I had more current in the bends. You know, racers tend to cut, just cut the corners, but there wasn't low water year. So on the Missouri, my fastest time, the least amount of work was to stay with the current in the bends. On the Mississippi, it was so low that the inside of the bend, the outside of the bend, it didn't matter. And the barges wanted to, like you do when you're racing, slide a car around the bend. That's how the tugs go around those corners. I wanted nothing to do, if they were coming fast. So I stuck to the inside. I was always out of their way. And so I just stayed to the insides. A lot of times I would cut across the river to stay on an inside. So I was all over the river, mainly just trying to stay out of their way and do the insides of the bends. Which brings up, there's a story for you, Norm. We'll do one more story that I've got a million, but we'll do one more. So what's interesting is in whitewater boating, the downstream traffic, whatever is going downstream, has the right of way. It turns out in barge traffic, it's the same thing. So a barge coming downstream has the right of way, and all the barges going upstream have to move and get out of the way. So normally what happens is they park between curves as the downstream people come. Well, the really good camping spots are right between the curves. So there were several nights, my tent's out on the sandbar on the edge, I'm camping there. And these barges have LED lights that can light up like a million lumens. And so I'm in my tent and my tent lights up. And then my tent lights up. I finally put my hand out and gave the guy the finger, but he was just having fun lighting up my tent the whole time while I'm sleeping in it. So there were several times when, as they were waiting, I would be listening to barges waiting for the downstream tow to go down, and then they could go up. That would be the other thing. Most of the campgrounds next to the river are there's the river, the campground, and the railroad track. And the railroads don't stop for anything. So it is very, very noisy. I sleep through anything. But some people have had to take earplugs and ear protection because it was too noisy because of the trains rolling through at nights, and they don't stop. So it can be noisy next in camp and next to the river. That's why sometimes out in the sandbars, you get away from things, just dead quiet, and you can hear everything.
Cool. Any more questions?
So Dave, did you see a difference in the weight on the barges on the Missouri versus Mississippi?
I saw 4 barges the whole time on the Missouri. It's just too low. just too low. They couldn't run.
Yeah.
I was told they're putting a new barge facility up in Omaha. I don't know why. It just, the barge traffic's been going down, down, down for years. I think someone just convinced somebody. I saw hundreds of former barge facilities on the river that the river had between 2011 2019 turned into steel balls, and now they're moving all that grain by either truck or train. They're not using barges. Mississippi, a different story, but the barges on the Missouri are much smaller than the Mississippi because there's just not that much room. So I saw if it's a low water year, you're going to see very few. And my first barge I didn't see till I was, where was I? It was north of, it was down near by Sioux City. I saw one at Sioux City, and I saw 3 between there and St. Louis. That's all I saw.
I paddle both the Missouri and Mississippi, and I've always thought that the barges on the Mississippi, the wakes were a lot less abusive. The Missouri one, you can really get into some big wakes there, and I've always assumed it was just due to the narrowness of the river.
Yeah, I think exactly. You're right. On the Mississippi, we have so much room, and you can get out of the way and you can deal with it. I always thought, am I going to have an issue with waves? The only time I ever had an issue with the wave is some jackass at Bismarck thought it was fun to come by me at 25 feet away. And my boat went up, down. He was drunk as a skunk. He violated about 9 million rules. I'm glad that he at least didn't run me over. But that's the only time I had severe wave action, is when I got buzzed by a boat. The rest of the time I was in good shape. But I stayed away from the barges. Yeah. The only time I got near a barge, I got up one morning on the Mississippi when, because I got on it right when the river really started to have problems. They almost shut down barge traffic from Memphis down to Vicksburg. I just know I got up one morning, took down the tent. Every single barge is parked. And I thought, that's weird. What's going on? So there was a gas barge. I felt I was safe enough. I could get up next to the crew was out on the deck, and I pulled in and we exchanged pleasantries and said, hey, what's going on? Everybody's parked. He said, well, some guy ran a barge on a sandbar, Greenville. And I actually got down to Greenville, and there it was, setting up on the sand. It wasn't a bad captain. The channel got low and collapsed, and he was running where he was supposed to be. But I'll have it in my log what the guy told me. The crewman on that gas barge said, because I asked him, so what does that mean? He says, you have the river to yourself for the next 2 days. And I did. It took them 2 days to clear that. I'm cutting down the middle. I don't care about anything. But yeah, you heard at the end of the summer how bad it was for river traffic because the river got so low. They're supposed to maintain a 9-foot channel depth. They started loading barges at 5-foot depth. And then they just quit loading them because they're loading half a barge. They weren't economically making anything. Now, thank goodness in the fall, the Ohio Valley got hit with some good water and the river came back up a little bit. But again, I considered a low water year to be an advantage, even though some of that was going on, because it kind of gave the river to myself. And it was pretty evident where I was going to go. I didn't have to worry about, I took my one shortcut. I didn't worry about any others, because if you took what looked like a shortcut, it usually ended up being dry land. You weren't going to be able to get through. So, and it's not looking, I thought it was looking real good. And the latest report that came out is not looking good for the upper Missouri Valley. It's just.
What's the snowpack out there like, Norm? I know in Colorado, they got some pretty good snowpack in certain areas.
Yeah, we got dumped on again. I don't know, another 20 inches in the mountains yesterday. And I think it's coming up. It's looking better than it was a month ago. We'll see how the next couple months fare. As long as it doesn't melt all at once, that's the problem. If it just warms up in the spring to 80s and we lose all of our snowpack in 2 weeks, the rivers are going to be bone dry again by August. So,
and you want to be really careful where the Missouri comes into Lake Fort Peck. Where the river comes into Lake Sac, every place where the river comes into the big lakes, you end up with a delta, because the sediment is falling out and building up there. I'm really good at reading water, so I knew where I should go and where I shouldn't go. I know there was a couple coming down from Three Forks. What was it, August, Norm? they got stuck in the mud flats.
They
They had to
did.
have an airboat come out and get them.
Yes.
So
Not-
yeah, those mud flats can be very, well, the deltas can be very dangerous. Again, I got lucky. The Yellowstone was blowing its brains out. I had the delta of the river going into Lake Sac come up nearly 6 inches in 2 weeks. So some stuff where I wouldn't have been able to go, I was able to float right over because I had extra water.
Anyone else? More questions? Doing great. These are great answers, Dave. I haven't heard a lot of this.
Well, it's, you guys taught me well. I read all the blog and asked lots of other paddlers questions. And again, I have no idea how I got so lucky to get to be part of the rendezvous, because it convinced me to do the Atchafalaya. You know, Ann's and Jay's video. I got a preview of what I was going to see. Just so many things fell into place to make it a magical tour. But yeah, there's so much data. I mean, I must have spent weeks reading each blog and seeing what different journeys were and what different people took. And I think the biggest thing is GPS, having an exit plan, being able to do SOS. The one gentleman that got bit by a rattlesnake that finished his trip last year.
Yeah.
Again, you need to understand how to walk around snake country and just don't do anything silly. Reaching into a wood pile looking for wood in snake country has hazards. So, and once you're on the sandbars, there is so much wood out there, especially since this was a dry year. I never had wood. I rarely had fires though. I would just sit in my camp on my little camp chair and just watch the world go by, listen to music once in a while. But, you know, you'd see beaver, deer would wander past you. I was above New Haven sitting on a back sandbar, and I'm sitting there. I'd been in camp for an hour, and I look off to my right, and here's a turtle about 1 foot in diameter come walking out from behind me. Apparently he had been there for a while, and I hadn't moved, so I was really quiet. He must have thought I was no longer there, and I just froze. I didn't have my camera; it was killing me. And he just kind of strolled by me and went down to the water. So, you know, just interacting with the world is really cool. Is part of this. I would have never seen, if it hadn't been for Rob suggesting staying at Hill Island, even though I gave up a day of paddling. I got to see all that wildlife. There were turkeys on the river that day, geese going up and down. Yeah, it's just amazing. Just the trip itself, it's just crazy cool.
Life-changing, right?
Very much so. I am a different person. My son will say I'm much more patient with myself than I used to be, because when you're on the river and something breaks, you can only get mad at yourself and it won't solve a thing. So yeah, I got real good at going, well, duct tape and baling wire, we're going to get down to the next place and we'll fix it later. So
do you feel like you've shifted back into being home, or are you
oh my God,
still on the trip?
I am back, but for the first 2 weeks, I didn't know how to use the TV remote. I couldn't. The first night off the water when my son picked me up, we went to Morgan City. I couldn't sleep because all the wrong noises were going on. There was no water. There's no bugs. There's no. It takes a little bit, which I think was cool because we don't get to disconnect from our world. And I literally took 4 months and disconnected and got to see what, no cell phone. Even when down on the Mississippi, when I could use my cell phone, I had gotten the habit of, I just don't need to turn it on. I have other things I can do, write my log, talk to the fishermen, go explore the sandbars around me. I remember Amanda talking about, she was part of the worst deer fly hatch in the history of the Missouri River. And so, but I had maybe 3 bad mosquito days, and I had a little bit of spray for the flies on the sandbars. So Dave Forbes got rained on every day the last 5 weeks of his trip. So the blogs are really good to read through what other people went through and try to be prepared for maybe some of what they did from that end. And those were very helpful to read. I really love the way Norm has got this post-trip debriefing sheet. There's some real valuable jewels in there that people put down after they've went through.
Thanks.
So for weather, you said, I think that you relied mainly on the Garmin inReach Does that give you a lot of wind and everything you need?
The only thing the Garmin didn't give me was radar. It told me, it gave me when it was supposed to be raining, how heavy the rain was, what direction. InReach is using, I think, something called Black Cloud. Their weather is a service, but it's part of your subscription. They were very, very good at the wind. If they said the wind shift was going to happen at 122, it happened at 122. I don't know what software they're using. There are much better weather apps for cell phones to give you that information, but I just didn't have cell phone coverage. I just couldn't use it. Especially in Montana on the lakes and stuff, I would paddle up to fishing boats because they always had radar and they always had it. And I would use them. Fishermen, one time especially, told me I had weather coming in. And if I hadn't talked to them, I don't think I'd been as prepared as I was. So everything but radar, and you can kind of look at the sky and tell, hey, I think I'm going to get hit. Wind is a little tougher, but I relied exclusively for wind off my InReach, and it served me very, very well.
Okay.
Anyone else? Well, if that's it, maybe we'll wind down here. And Dave, you want any final comments to make?
I just thanks for everyone showing up. I know a lot of my friends that never got to see the in-person ones. This is the only way they're going to see my trip. And you know, thanks Norm for taping it, because then it can go out there and I can send other people to it. And hopefully some of what's on here will help this year's paddlers. Every journey is different. Everyone looks at things differently, but if you can pick everyone's brains, you can pick out what you want to do and the parts you don't. And I think I did that very heavily, and I think that's part of the cool trip. So no, thank you. This has been a lot of fun.
Appreciate it.
Yeah,
Thank you, Dave.
And for those that are doing the 2023, if you're post your loop or your track, because I will follow you every day. And really at Wilson Island, if I can be there, we've got to try to make it happen. I will show up and be a resupply for you, even though it's the other side of the state. It's not that far for me to come over and stay for a couple of days and help you get resupplied and get you into town or something, because after you go by Maybes, I don't think there's a lot of river angels in that stretch. So I'll try to help out and fill that role.
So who in this group is doing it this year? I know I am.
Yeah, Bill is.
Steve, okay.
Yeah.
All right.
You guys are going to have so much fun. It's so cool.
So there's what, 3 on here? I know of probably maybe 5 others that are not on here. There's an Australian gal who just recently completed a source to sea of the Nile in Africa, and she's going to be the first Australian woman to go source to sea. And the source meaning Brower Spring, the utmost source of the Missouri, which is about 200 miles upstream of Three Forks. And I think there's another gal going solo too. So it's going to be a pretty good year, I think, for paddlers. Looking forward to it.
It'll be fun to follow everybody.
Oh yeah. Okay, I guess that's it. I'll try to have this posted within the week on YouTube, and we'll get the link out to everybody. Thanks for coming, and Dave, thanks a lot. I appreciate it. It was really interesting. It was great to meet you this summer at the Rendezvous, and glad you were a part of it. And I'm glad I was a part of your trip in some way too. So I appreciate it.
Oh, absolutely. It has been a blast. So thanks for hosting this stuff, Norm. It's great.
Okay.
Yeah, we do appreciate it, guys. Thank you.
Over
Okay,
now.
bye-bye.
Take care.
Thanks, Dave. Thanks, Dave. See y'all.